We're standing here in the wilderness east of Jerusalem, about halfway down to Jericho. And we have been traveling down because you always go down to Jericho and up to Jerusalem. This is a wilderness area where it tells us in Mark chapter 1, when Jesus came from Nazareth down to Jericho to be baptized by John, it says, while he was praying, the Spirit came upon him. But interesting then in Matthew chapter 4:1, we're told that immediately the Spirit thrust Jesus into the wilderness. And the word there led Jesus into the wilderness, thrust him into the wilderness. The same word used to cast the demon out of the demoniac. Jesus was thrust into the wilderness for 40 days where he was tempted by Satan. And it's interesting, whenever I bring groups out here in the wilderness, and we're here early in the morning and we're already, it's heat and the harshness. I'd love to send groups out for a 15, 20 minutes and just experience time alone in this wilderness. I have them come back and list 3 or 4 words that describe that wilderness experience in that short period of time. They always come back with words like harsh or simple or quiet or peaceful or lonely, deserted, dependence, brokenness. All words to describe the simple beauty and yet the harshness of this region where the Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness. If you go in the northern part of Israel, it's lush rivers, the start of the Jordan's way up there, and fresh green crops. But down in South Israel, you have the desert area and the difficult, dry, barren land. They have a saying here in Israel that if you want to be rich, you go north. But if you want to be wise, you go south. And it's interesting, at the very beginning of this ministry, the Spirit of God led Jesus into the wilderness. During the next 6 weeks, we're going to look at the life of Christ and how Jesus did what he did. What does it mean to walk as Jesus walked? We're going to look at not just what did Jesus say, his message, or even what he did, his methods, but we're going to look at how Jesus walked as he walked. And we're going to look at the acronym of Holy Spirit power. And it's interesting, as I'm standing here in the wilderness, the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, I see all of those ingredients functioning. We're told that he was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, and he came out of the wilderness full of the Holy Spirit. He was here for 40 days in prayer, which was the second foundational priority. He was obeying his Father. He used the word to quote Satan when Satan tempted it. He exalted his Father rather than taking shortcuts. And then he came out of this wilderness experience and began to call his disciples, saying, come and see or follow me. You find Jesus living out the values we're going to talk about even at the beginning of his ministry of Holy Spirit power. All 6 of those values, Holy Spirit dependence, prayerful guidance, obedient living, word-centered focus, exalting the Father, and then relationships can be seen at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry all the way through his ministry. But this week, we're going to focus on the whole issue of Holy Spirit dependence. Jesus, we're told, was conceived by the Holy Spirit. He was anointed by the Spirit. He was filled by the Spirit, led by the Spirit, rejoiced in the Spirit. He gave commands by the Spirit and performed miracles by the Spirit. And then we're told that he also was raised by the Spirit. Gerald Hawthorne, who's written a book about the role of the Holy Spirit in the life of Jesus called The Presence and Power, says this. He said, every aspect of Jesus' human life on this planet was directed and led by and controlled by the Spirit of God. And what a beautiful insight when we begin to see how Jesus, in his humanity, did what he did through the power of the Spirit of God. And if that's true of Jesus, how much more is that true of us? As you do this study this week, I think you're going to see that dimension in Jesus' life. One of the things that I want to challenge you with that was so powerfully impacted me as I began to see the Holy Spirit in the life of Jesus was in John chapter 14. Toward the end of his ministry, Jesus said, I've got to leave you. You're going to have troubles in this world, and you can do what I do in John 14. But then he says, it's good that I go away because I'm going to give you another counselor. I remember when I was studying that to preach and teach that in our church, and I started studying the word counselor, which is the comforter, the parakletos. It's the Holy Spirit that Jesus was going to pour out in our lives. And I was studying that, talking about that, thinking about that. But then I began to study in John 14 what it tells us. In John 14, verse 16, Jesus said, I'm going to give you another counselor. And all of a sudden, I began to study that word another. And I found that Jesus did not use there the typical word, not the word heteros, but he used the word allos. What Jesus was saying here, it's good that I go away because I'm going to give you another counselor. And Jesus was the first counselor, the wonderful counselor. But he says, I'm going to give you the Holy Spirit. And that Holy Spirit's going to be another counselor of the exact same kind. Boy, when I read that, just like rockets went off in my head, because I know the Gospel of John well enough to know that the disciples started off as seekers and then followers and then co-workers and co-servants. But by this time in the Gospel of John, Jesus is going to call his disciples friends. And basically what he's saying, it's good that I go away so that the Holy Spirit can be to you what I was to my 12 disciples. And Jesus at this time was calling his disciples best friends. And what that's saying is the Holy Spirit wants to be to us what Jesus was to his disciples, our best friend. The question I challenge you with this week, do you see the Holy Spirit as your best friend? As you go through the book of Acts, that's what you find. Over 50 times in the book of Acts, they referred to the acts of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit encouraged, the Holy Spirit warned, the Holy Spirit opened doors, the Holy Spirit closed doors. And then I love in Acts 15, verse 28, where it basically says that the leaders had a problem. They met together in a room. They came out of that room and they said, it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us. What does that picture paint? It paints a beautiful picture of how the Holy Spirit had become friends to the initial disciples, to the Christians, the leaders. As they met, discussed the problem, left an empty chair for the Holy Spirit, came out of that meeting and said, it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us. You see, to Jesus, the Holy Spirit was the power for what he did. And for us, Jesus said, it should be our friend. Just as Jesus was to the 12, the Holy Spirit wants to be to us. Is the Holy Spirit your best friend? Do you have an intimate relationship with him? May God guide you in that study this week.